The night my sister's engagement party was supposed to become the happiest evening of her life, I watched her smile collapse when our father quietly asked me to take the folder from his briefcase and hand it to the attorney sitting 3 tables away, because inside that folder was a record of transactions that could change our family forever. I had spent the previous year believing my biggest responsibility was helping Dad recover after his stroke. But as the violinist played beneath the glass ceiling of the Lakeshore Pavilion, I finally understood that someone close to us had been using his illness as a doorway into his finances, and the person standing closest to that doorway was my younger sister, Marissa. Dad, Everett Hale, had always been the kind of man who could remember every receipt, every promise, and every dollar he ever spent. But after his stroke left him unable to speak easily, people began mistaking his silence for confusion, including Marissa, who suddenly volunteered to handle the complicated paperwork, while I focused on his physical care and rehabilitation. I never suspected her at first because she was charming with doctors, affectionate whenever Dad was watching, and constantly telling everyone that she was sacrificing her own life to protect his future, until I discovered that several payments supposedly made for Dad's medical equipment had actually gone to luxury furniture stores, a private travel company, and a jewelry boutique where Marissa had purchased an expensive bracelet for her upcoming wedding. Instead of confronting her immediately, I started quietly collecting information, comparing bank statements with hospital invoices, photographing documents before they disappeared, and writing down dates whenever Marissa claimed Dad had approved something he could not physically explain to me. One evening, while sorting through a stack of mail in Dad's study, I found an old notebook in which he had written a simple sentence before his stroke. "Never let anyone make decisions for me when I cannot speak." And beneath it was a list of 3 people he trusted, none of whom were Marissa or our mother, Celeste. The next morning, I contacted Nora Whitcomb, a financial elder care specialist recommended by Dad's rehabilitation center, and instead of telling her my suspicions, I placed every document I had collected across her conference table and let her examine the pattern herself. She spent nearly an hour comparing the dates before finally looking up and saying, "Your father wasn't paying for care. Someone was using care as an excuse to move his money." And that sentence frightened me more than any accusation could have, because it meant the problem was no longer a family disagreement, but something deliberately constructed. Nora discovered that Marissa had convinced Dad to sign a temporary authorization months earlier by telling him it was necessary to arrange transportation to his therapy sessions. Yet the document gave her access to accounts that were never supposed to be touched for personal expenses. The deeper Nora dug, the stranger the records became, because thousands of dollars had been transferred into an account belonging to a small event planning company that had no employees, no real office, and one striking connection to Marissa. Its registered owner was her fiancé's cousin. When I confronted Marissa privately, she didn't scream or deny anything. Instead, she leaned against the kitchen counter, folded her arms, and said, "Dad has more money than he'll ever spend, so why shouldn't some of it help the family?" And when I reminded her that Dad was still alive and still capable of making his own choices, her expression hardened as she replied, "You always cared more about rules than people." I realized then that she wasn't embarrassed by what she had done. She was angry that I had discovered it before she could finish whatever plan she had been building. 2 weeks later, Dad's condition unexpectedly improved enough for him to communicate through a digital tablet, and during a private meeting with Nora and a court-appointed advocate, he answered questions one at a time, selecting words with painful concentration while everyone waited patiently for each response. When asked whether he had approved Marissa's wedding expenses, Dad stared at the screen for several seconds before typing, "I was told it was medical," and then he added another sentence that left the room completely silent. "I would never choose a wedding over my care." We immediately froze the questionable accounts and notified the appropriate authorities, but Marissa learned about the investigation before we could warn her, and she responded by turning the entire family against me, telling relatives that I was trying to steal Dad's inheritance and destroy her wedding because I was jealous of her happiness. My mother believed her at first, calling me late one night and saying, "You should be protecting your sister, not building a case against her." But when I asked whether she had ever seen the invoices Marissa claimed existed, there was a long silence followed by a trembling admission that she had accepted several envelopes of cash from Marissa without asking where they came from. The wedding went ahead at the Lakeshore Pavilion despite the financial investigation, and Marissa seemed determined to prove that nothing could stop her from having the celebration she wanted, arriving beneath a canopy of white flowers while photographers captured every smile and champagne glass for the guests. I almost stayed home, but Dad insisted through his tablet that he wanted me beside him, so I arrived early, helped him settle near the main ballroom, and carried one sealed envelope containing evidence that I hoped I would never have to open. During dinner, Marissa's fiancé, Daniel, quietly approached me with a strange expression and asked, "Why did the hotel manager just tell me that the final payment was rejected?" Before showing me a copy of the billing record, and my stomach dropped when I saw Dad's name listed beside a transfer that had never been authorized. I told Daniel that he deserved to know the truth before he married Marissa, but before I could explain further, Marissa appeared behind him and announced loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear, "My sister has always hated seeing me succeed," turning the room against me before I had even said another word. Then the lights suddenly dimmed for the wedding slideshow, and instead of photographs appearing on the enormous screen, a folder of financial records accidentally opened because the event coordinator had connected the wrong laptop to the projector. For nearly 30 seconds, the entire ballroom watched transfers, invoices, vendor names, and payment confirmations appear one after another, and when Marissa rushed toward the stage screaming for the technician to shut it down. Daniel stood completely still because he recognized the name of the shell company that had received thousands of dollars from his future bride. Marissa finally broke down and admitted that she had taken the money, but insisted she intended to return every dollar after the wedding because she believed Dad's estate would eventually belong to the family anyway, and Daniel looked at her as though he no longer recognized the woman he had planned to marry. Dad then raised his tablet, typed slowly while the ballroom remained silent, and when his voice synthesizer finally spoke the words, "My money is not an inheritance while I am alive," even my mother lowered her head because there was nothing left to defend. The investigation eventually uncovered far more than the original transactions, revealing that Marissa had created false descriptions for dozens of payments, redirected refunds, manipulated electronic signatures, and used money meant for Dad's home modifications to finance parts of her wedding and an expensive vacation she had taken months earlier. She accepted a legal settlement requiring full restitution and strict financial restrictions. While Daniel canceled the marriage, my mother began cooperating with the investigation, and Dad's accounts were placed under safeguards that allowed him to make his own decisions without giving anyone else control over his future. Months later, Dad moved into a bright assisted living apartment overlooking a quiet park, and I accepted a promotion at work while launching a small consulting service that helped families organize medical paperwork, financial records, and care plans for relatives who could no longer manage everything alone. The experience changed me in ways I never expected, because I learned that protecting someone does not mean controlling them. Forgiveness does not require pretending nothing happened, and sometimes the strongest act of love is simply making sure a vulnerable person's voice is heard when others assume their silence means they have none. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Dad and I sat beside his apartment window drinking tea while he typed something on his tablet, and after several slow corrections, the screen finally displayed 3 words. "You stayed, thank you," which made me realize that all the arguments, accusations, paperwork, and sleepless nights had ultimately been about something much simpler than money. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.